said with the good people, that the experience of losing a child has made me a more thoughtful, more compassionate person, probably a better rabbi, and certainly a more successful author. Mm-hmm. And if I could, I would give it all back in a second if I could have my child back. But, you know, it's the Viktor Frankl quote we were talking about. Yeah. I had no choice as to whether he would live or die. I have a big choice what I would do about it.
Right.
First of all, it changed my theology.
How is that?
I was raised to believe that if something tragically unfair happens, we can't understand God's purposes, but God must have his purposes. Uh-huh. To my embarrassment, I used that line on a lot of congregants until I found myself on the receiving end. And when I tried to say those words to myself, I was so offended by them, I was so put off by them, I could not hold on to that.
You mean that God has his reasons?
Yeah, that God chose not to spare my son's life, that I would pray, and God chose just to let him die of this illness. I went through a period of about 3 months, not sure if I could continue as a rabbi. And every Sabbath morning, get up and tell people to pray to God and to believe in God, and officiate at a bar mitzvah ceremony of some other family's little boy growing up and knowing my son never would. And I finally came to the conclusion that what happened, God did not want to happen, but that God does not control laws of nature, not genetics, not falling rocks, not earthquakes, not hurricanes, not tsunamis, not speeding bullets, not out-of-control automobiles. They follow laws of physics. Nature is blind. God is moral. Nature can't tell good from bad. And God does not control the choice human beings have between good and evil. The Holocaust, you don't have to explain why did God let it happen. God made it possible when he gave us free will. And he said, if you choose wrong, you're going to have to learn from the consequences.
So what does God do?
What does God do? Did you read about that experiment last summer of post-surgical patients in hospitals? They divided them into two groups. One group was prayed for, one group was not prayed for, and it made no difference at all in their recovery.
Yes, I did, actually.
Somebody asked me about that, and I said, you know, God's job is not to make sick people healthy. That's a doctor's job. God's job is to make sick people brave. That's what God does. God gives people the courage to deal with illness. God gives people the courage to survive the loss of a child, to survive the loss of their health. God inspires friends and neighbors to come and try and comfort them. Listen, you know, as everybody out there knows, it is no fun to try and make a grieving person feel better. You feel so inadequate. But we do it. Something in us impels us to do that. The day after Yom Kippur, I'm going to New Orleans to try and bring some consolation to the community there, whose city was virtually washed away a year ago. And one of the things I'm going to say to them is, God was not in the hurricane. God was in the response of so many people to the hurricane. The decision to rebuild the city, the thousands and thousands of college students who gave up their spring break to come and build houses in New Orleans for Habitat for Humanity, the people who sent blankets, who sent money, who sent food, who took you into their homes. This is what God does. God teaches us to be resilient, and God teaches us to be compassionate. God does not pull the strings.
Yet you talk about arguing with God. And in fact, I mean, one of the things I found amusing is the line where you say, well, God can take it. Be angry. He can take it. What do you see as the value of arguing? I mean, you almost see it as a positive value.
I do. I absolutely do.
And why is that?
Two things, Paula.
Yeah.
First, if you are feeling angry, why should I try and teach you to be emotionally false to yourself? Why should I teach you to swallow your anger and say, God be praised, God has his reasons, there must be a good purpose for it? That's emotionally dishonest, and religion should not do that. More importantly, do you know who Aviva Zornberg is? She's an absolutely brilliant Bible scholar who now lives in Jerusalem, originally from an Orthodox family in England, plus a PhD in English literature from Cambridge. I heard her lecture once where she said, in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses admits that he's angry at God. Because remember, God says everybody else is going to get into the promised land, you won't. Moses says, I'm angry at God. And right after he articulates his anger at God, and right after he gives the Israelites permission to be angry at God and not to have to choke back their, you know, if God really loved us, he would have sent the Egyptians into the desert and let us live in Egypt. Right after that, you get something you did not have in the Bible before. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Before that passage, which Jews recognize from the Shema, which Christians recognize because Jesus says that is the greatest commandment, before that the Bible never talks about loving God. It talks about obeying God, revering God, following God, but not love. Why? Because if you don't let yourself express and confront the anger, you can't feel the love. The wife who will not admit that she's angry at her husband cannot love him because she is blocking all the emotion. And only when she permits herself to get the anger out and balance it with the love, only then can they relate honestly to each other.
Makes sense. I do want to ask you, though, whether a lot of the things that you're saying make sense if one doesn't believe in God. And I think that's an issue that one has to grapple with, because I think one can be a moral person, an ethical person, and have doubts, grave doubts, if not be an unbeliever. Do you see that as a contradiction?
Paula, there are self-proclaimed atheists I know who I would trust to hold my wallet while I go jogging sooner than some of my colleagues in the rabbinate.
So what does that mean?
I'll tell you what it means.
Yeah.
When someone says to me, I don't believe in God, what I respond is, tell me about this God you don't believe in. Because there are a lot of gods I don't believe in either.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll find that we both reject a certain concept of God. You know, God the all-controlling, God the punitive father. I don't believe in any of that. And maybe we'll come up with a concept of God that we can both believe in. I mean, it's meaningless to say you don't believe in God unless you talk about which definition of God are you talking about.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit to the world situation. Your books have dealt with personal crises, personal coping mechanisms, and so forth, but we're at a time now of great global crisis. Do you have thoughts about transferring some of the ideas in your books to the larger world situation? And have you, I mean, I wonder even if you've thought of writing another book to deal with that, but also any wisdom that you would bring to bear on where we stand right now in the world.
Well, the first thing I would say is I don't think up the ideas of my books. They find me. So I don't know if I write another book, I don't know, no idea what it'll be about. I'm much more comfortable talking about personal stuff. My high holiday sermons, I grew up in a world where the rabbi was expected to expound on what's going on in the world, criticize the United Nations, evaluate the president's foreign and economic policies. That's not for me.
Yeah.
Some years ago, I was invited when Bad Things Happen to Good People has been translated to like 14 or 15 languages, one of them Danish. I have a whole shelf full of books that I've written that I can't read. I was invited to Copenhagen to speak in the great synagogue there. This is 1984. This is right after the Pershing missiles had gone into Western Europe. And Europe was worried about the prospect of nuclear war on their threshold. And when I finished talking about Bad Things Happen to Good People, a young Danish woman in the synagogue asked me if what did my theology have to say about the prospect of nuclear holocaust? I said, I really don't know, but the first thing that comes to mind is if human beings are going to be heedless enough to endanger the future of the world, God is not going to come down and prevent us from harming ourselves. The chief rabbi of Denmark disagreed with me, quoted a passage from Isaiah, assuring us that God would not permit the world to be destroyed. And I was not about to pick a fight with him in his own synagogue, so I just let the matter drop. But I think that's a dangerous attitude. No, if we have learned nothing else from the Holocaust, it is if human beings set out to do something cruel and destructive, either other human beings will stop them or nobody will stop them. God is not going to prevent it. People have said to me, Paula, so many people die in automobile accidents. Would have been so hard for God to cause Hitler to die when he was 25 years old and spare us all that. And the answer is, God is not going to interfere, no matter what the price is. If we're not going to figure out what the right thing to do is, we're going to have to suffer the consequences. Yes, it scares me. I worry. I worry about global warming, and I worry about AIDS, and I worry about the world selling out Israel. There are a lot of things that concern me. I can just hope as one person that there is an innate decency in people which will drive them to insist on the right path, on the path of enhancing humanity, that people will learn to recognize the compassionate voice of God and not the condemning voice of God. That they will remember that religion is supposed to be about whom you're required to love, not whom you're entitled to hate.
Well, I think if more people were to read your books and extract that message, the world would be a better place. I want to thank you very much for being here today.
It's really been to you,
quite a wonderful exchange. And I want to thank you for joining us today for the Drexel interview.